Today, I'm continuing with our autism history series by talking about Grunya Sukhareva. But before I jump into that, I want to mention that the editing of my videos may change a little bit from now on, since I've been forced, unfortunately, to switch from CapCut to another video editing app. So bear with me during this transition. Knowing our community, we're not exactly big on change, so hope it doesn't bother you too much. So anyways, previously on my autism history series, I covered work by clinician researchers like Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger, but I also had a number of folks comment that they wanted to hear more about the work of Grunya Sukhareva, since her groundbreaking research is only more recently being recognized. So here goes. Grunya Sukhareva was born in 1891 in Kiev, which was then part of the Russian Empire, but is now, of course, in Ukraine. In 1915, she graduated from the Kiev Medical Institute, and by 1921, she had moved to Moscow, starting a hospital/school for kids with psychiatric issues. During this time, she was mentored by Mikhail Osipovich Gerevich. Sure, I'm probably mutilating that, so sorry. And he had trained under Emil Kraepelin while in Germany. Kraepelin is responsible for recognizing and describing symptoms of the condition we now know as schizophrenia, although he originally called it dementia praecox or premature dementia. So this transgenerational influence probably explains why Sukhareva focused so much on schizophrenia-related conditions, a group of conditions that autism was originally considered part of. Now, Sukhareva was a child and adolescent psychiatrist and is extremely well known for her work in the former USSR. Unfortunately, because of Soviet isolation during World War II and the Cold War, her renown didn't break through those Soviet barriers, and it's only more recently that we started to recognize how groundbreaking her work on autism was. Like Leo Kanner, Sukhareva was Jewish, a fact that some have argued may have led to her work going uncited, in particular by Hans Asperger. Her main paper, called Schizoid Psychopathies in Childhood, which was published in 1925 and later published in German in 1926, that may well have crossed Asperger's path, providing inspiration for his own work, which was very similar to Sukhareva's. However, it's believed that if he was familiar with her work and influenced by it, the fact that she was a Jewish Russian woman may have influenced his decision not to cite her 2 decades later, because he was actively working in Austria under the Nazi regime. Again, though, this is strictly modern speculation, but the similarities between the descriptions of their 2 sets of patients are rather striking. Although Sukhareva's paper focused on trying to distinguish between what psychiatry at the time was calling schizoids and cycloids, aka autism versus childhood schizophrenia, Sukhareva was writing about how to differentiate these 2 conditions, particularly as they tended to be viewed as more of a difference in severity rather than of kind. In fact, she used the term autistic in her case studies paper, but she used it as an adjective rather than a clinical label. This is very similar to the way Eugen Bleuler coined and used the term in his work on schizophrenia to refer to the social withdrawal people with the condition sometimes engage in. In short, for many decades, the word autistic was used as an adjective in psychiatry, not as a label. Even Leo Kanner's original paper title referred to autistic disturbances rather than autism, and Asperger's as autistic psychopathy. Instead, the term autism was only slowly being recognized as a specific set of behaviors and developmental patterns even well into the 1970s. By 1979, the Autism Society of America published the first definition of autism, and the following year, infantile autism was inducted into the DSM-3. So keep that in mind for that much of its history, autistic wasn't a diagnosis, it was a symptom to describe social withdrawal. Anyways, back to Grunya Sukhareva's paper. Almost 20 years before Kanner and Asperger, she wrote a case studies paper on 6 boys labeled with the diagnosis schizoid psychopathy, and which would now be considered autistic. Sukhareva had the benefit of spending a great deal of time interacting with and observing these boys because they had been at her hospital/school for about 2 years. Throughout her career, it was noted that Sukhareva was a warm and sympathetic character, and her descriptions of the boys are no exception. Aside from noting some of their challenges, she also stressed their achievements as well as their talents, providing an unusually complex and full picture of her patients, something that even today medicine struggles with. As you can probably imagine, given the definition of autistic used in psychiatry at the time, in her case studies, Sukhareva noted that, quote, all affected children keep themselves apart from their peers, find it hard to adapt to, and are never fully themselves among other children. All these children manifest a tendency towards solitude and avoidance of other people from early childhood onwards, end quote. But in addition to that main feature, she also described characteristics we'd now recognize as difficulties adapting to changes in routine, obsessive interests, good systemizing abilities, motor discoordination, sensory sensitivities, and even echolalia. Most astoundingly, one can see in her papers as well as her extensive clinical notes that she hit on all the major features of the modern definition of autism, including sensory sensitivities that ironically weren't even included in the DSM until as late as 2013. In 1927, Sukhareva also wrote a follow-up paper to her first one, another case studies paper, but this time on 5 girls with schizoid psychopathy, aka autism. She recognized that the girls exhibited some notable differences from the boys, including greater challenges in managing and responding to emotional experiences and fewer unusual or atypical obsessive interests, both features which we recognize occur more often in autistic females today. Anyways, for these reasons and more, Grunya Sukhareva's lifetime work has received a growing appreciation from Western societies because we now realize how ahead of her time she was. And I'll mention that if you're interested in learning more about her, there's an interesting article in the Transmitter called "How History Forgot the Woman Who Defined Autism," and there's another good article by Scher and Gibson from 2021 called "Pioneering, Prodigious, and Perspicacious: Grunya Efimovna Sukhareva's Life and Contribution to Conceptualizing Autism and Schizophrenia." Those were some of the articles that I used to build this video, so I do recommend reading them if you want to find out more about her life and her work. I will say it's a shame that Western awareness of Grunya Sukhareva's work has only occurred more recently, but I am at least glad she's finally getting recognition for her work in autism. Her name really should have been titled along with the other male clinicians like Connor and Asperger, whose work was received so much attention comparatively. But I suppose it's better late than never, right? And hopefully it'll only increase with time. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this week's installment and our continued journey through some of the major events and figureheads in autism research. Join me next week when I pop back over to the science side of things and talk about autoimmune disorders in autism and Ehlers-Danlos, so be sure to stay tuned. Anyways, until next time, take care and ciao.